your peace. The ones we've done so far are, let me sow, where there's hatred, let me sow love. And where there is injury, let me sow pardon. Where there's doubt, faith. Today we move on to the next couple of lines. Where there is despair, let me sow hope. And where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. This is Kent Nurburn's book, Make Me an Instrument of Your Peace. Living in the Spirit is the prayer of St. Francis. This is a little what he has to say on this chapter about being light, sowing light. It is not given to us to know who is lost in the darkness that surrounds us, or even if our light is seen. We can only know that against even the smallest of lights, darkness cannot stand. A sailor lost at sea can be guided home by a single candle. A person lost in a wood can be led to safety by a flickering flame. It's not an issue of quality or intensity or purity. It's simply an issue of the presence of light. This beautiful prayer reminds us that we all have light, no matter how faint and fragile, and it calls us to proceed as if it is our light that matters. Perhaps, it tells us, it is our light that will make a difference.
Reading from the 42nd Psalm. Like a stag, a doe, longing for streams of cool water, my whole being longs for you, my God. My soul aches with thirst for God, for a God that lives. When can I go and see God face to face? My only food, day or night, is my tears. They recriminate me. Where is your God, they say. Every day, Yahweh, you ordain your love toward me, and during the night, you bring me your song. In my prayers to the God of my life, I say to God, my rock, why have you forgotten me? Why do you keep me in mourning, oppressed by an unseen enemy? My bones are shattered by their words. Foes taunt me constantly. Where is your God? They say. Why so dispirited? I ask myself. Why so churned up inside? Hope in God. I know I'll praise God once again. For you are my deliverance. You are my God.
Would you join me as I pray the prayer of St. Francis? So we begin. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there's hatred, let me sow love. Where there's injury, let me sow pardon. Where there's doubt, faith. Where there's despair, hope. Where there's darkness, light. And where there's sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not seek so much to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in forgiving that we are forgiven, and it is in dying that we're born to eternal life. God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be full of your wisdom and your insight. Amen. Do any of you ever read the Psalms? A couple of you? There's a lot of lament and sadness in the Psalms, a lot of despair and hopelessness in the Psalms. And that's why I picked the one that I picked today. If you listen to the words, you know, my soul aches with thirst for God. It's a crying out in one of those times in your life where it's like, well, God, where did you go? I'm hurting so bad, I feel like I'm lost and alone. There is no hope. There is no light. Where can I go and see God face to face? My only food, day or night, is my tears. They recriminate me. Where's your God, they say. Because clearly, if your God was here, you wouldn't be feeling this way. And my bones are shattered by their words. This is somebody who's in the deepest darkness of despair, and yet the last lines are, why so dispirited, I ask myself? Why so churned up inside? Hope in God. I know I'll praise God once again, for you are my deliverance. You are my God. Even in the midst of all of the lamenting and the sorrow and the grieving and the pain in the Psalms, there's always, in just about every one, a trust in the steadfast love of God and a lifting up. But oh, to be in those places of pain and torment. I think we've all probably been in one of those at one point in time, right? If not, a little bit if you're, yeah. So my question, okay, so for just a second, remember what that feels like. To be in one of your darkest times, to feel that despair, to feel that sadness and that lostness and that emptiness. My question for you is, when you're in that place, and assuming you'd like to be lifted at least a little bit out of that place, who do you want to see walk through the door? You got a picture of that person in your mind? You know who that is? Now, who don't you want to see walk through the door? You got that person in your mind now, too? Okay, now what's the difference? Compassion. What was that? Love?
Love.
Love. Positive versus negative.
How about trust?
Trust.
Judgmental.
Judge.
Not
Someone who's judgmental versus non-judgmental.
nurturing versus toxic.
Nurturing versus toxic. Understanding versus not understanding.
Genuine.
Genuine.
Uplifting, not degrading.
Uplifting, not degrading.
Safe.
Safe.
Supportive.
Supportive.
Listening, not talking.
Someone who listens. Who's just with you, present with you. Instead of having, yeah. You chuckling over there, Jim? You know a few of those people? Yeah, I think we all do. All of the reasons that you want to see that one particular person come in the door when you're despairing, all of those characteristics that we just lifted up, and probably more that we didn't say, those are the ways that we plant the seeds of hope and light and joy in the midst of despair and darkness and sadness. It wasn't rocket science. It's not something we can't do. You know, I think sometimes we know those folks who are in that place and we don't know how to be with them, and we don't know what to say and what to do. But everything you just said is really pretty easy. It's being there with them. It's being hope and being light and being joy. And I'm not talking about, sitting there and cracking jokes. I'm talking about, when someone has a deep, abiding joy about them. Right? That's the kind of joy we nurture in ourselves so we can give it to others. But it's easier to get hung up on the negative. This world is really, really good about negative. It's sort of the first place we go. Somebody says, "Hey, Scott, how you doing today?" And you kind of want to go, "Well, this happened, and the weather's still crappy, and if something else, it's always the weather is crappy. I don't care what it is outside. It's too hot, it's too cold, it's too whatever." watch this in myself. And I'm liable to start with the what's wrong instead of, yeah, oh, life is great. I got to do this and I got to do this. We don't start with our blessings. You know, I've got a creative worship group that meets about once a month to help me brainstorm about these sermons. And boy, they took to this topic like it was nobody's business. We were passionate about what's negative and what we're despairing about, what's going wrong in the world, and the sadness that's out there going on and on and on. I finally looked at them like, time out. The sermon's about planting seeds of hope and light and joy. I see that we're really good at despairing. But how do we plant those seeds? And they all just kind of stopped and went, oh, well, okay. It's amazing I have a sermon for this morning, frankly. To completely shift gears. So winter seems to have come really early this year, hasn't it? I read an article, and it's been going around Facebook, so maybe some of you have seen it. But it was written on November 6th about a study that was done in Norway. Now, in Norway, from the end of November to the end of January, so 2 good months, the sun never gets above the horizon. And so theoretically, you would think that there would be more seasonal depression in that area of the world. So there was a PhD student from Stanford who looked into this and found that there wasn't more incidents of seasonal depression, and she wanted to find out why. So she went to Norway, and she started asking people, well, why aren't you more depressed? And they looked through and they said, well, why should we be? It turns out that if you want to be happier, the best thing you can do is change your mindset. To look for things that are good. To watch for the blessings. So as she started to talk to people, she found that instead of dreading these 2 months, people actually looked forward to them. That they enjoyed those 2 months instead of just enduring them. And there were sort of 3 things that people did. One, they looked forward to being outside of all things. Can you imagine outside in the winter? You know, skiing was a big thing. They were looking forward to skiing. There's a saying there, apparently, that there is no bad weather, there's only bad clothing. And I've discovered that that's true now that I have to walk the dog every day of the year. But getting outside is known for lifting your spirits. Being in nature is known as an antidote to depression. So find your boots, find your hats, find some warm mittens, get some cuddle duds or whatever, and stop our complaining, I think, is part of that message. So the second thing they do is they've got a word called kuselig, K-O-S-E-L-I-G. So if I'm pronouncing it wrong, I apologize to all the Norwegians out there. But it pretty much means coziness. They look forward to the coziness, you know? They light candles and they light fires and they make warm drinks and they get out their fuzzy blankets and it's not just about snuggling in and watching TV for 2 months. You know, they invite their friends over and they have community and there are community festivals and events that are planned so everybody can get together and celebrate the season. And community is another one of those things that lifts your spirits, that brings light to the darkness. And the last thing was beauty. You know, if the sun never gets above the horizon, it is constantly dusk. You know, kind of sunset, sunrise, and all those pretty colors, those soft pastels in the sky, and they talk about the beauty. So to find beauty in this world, like you were talking about with the sun and with the hawk, if you appreciate it, if you stop to appreciate it, it lifts you up. So the message in planting seeds of hope and light and joy is to, in part, to start to change our mindset. To be aware enough to watch ourselves when we go down that negative path of the weather sucks or whatever else is going wrong. Can you stop and start with something good? Can you start there? So another thought, Kent Nerburn in this book that I just read to you from tells a story about when he was living in Germany for a couple of years. And he said he was getting really bummed out because he felt really alone and missing the U.S. And so he decided he would take himself to an American film in English. And to do that, he had to take a train, had to travel a little ways, a couple towns down or whatever. And he got there really, really early. And so he sat in the park. And he watched as people came and went, and it got later and later, and the stores started to close, and people shut down, got in their cars, got in their buses, went home, and it was pretty empty in the park he was sitting in, and suddenly he saw this man kind of staggering toward him, clearly having had one too many. And as he got closer, he realized that this man was sobbing and had tears streaming down his face. And as he got even closer, he said, "Guten Abend," good evening, to this man. And as he looked in his eyes, he said they were the saddest eyes he had ever seen in his entire life. And he invited the man to sit down next to him. And in his broken German and the man's broken English, the story finally came out. The man was a judge, well respected in his community. That morning, as he was driving to work, a young girl ran out in front of his car and he hit her and killed her instantly. And he had been walking around drinking and crying all day. And he kept saying, I'm a judge. How can this happen? Why couldn't I stop in time? This shouldn't happen to me. I'm a judge. And Kent tried to talk to him and tried to find some words of comfort, something to help. And the man finally just kind of looked at him and said, "Don't talk. I don't need words right now. I just need someone to be near." And so he sat with them late into the night. Occasionally the man would reach over and hold his hand, and occasionally he would just spontaneously burst into tears and sob. And a couple of times Kent tried to get up to go to sort of leave him alone in his grief, and each time the man would grab his hand and pull him back down and keep him there. And he said the thing that he learned that day was that when people are in the midst of despair, what they need most is someone to just be with them. That to be hope in the midst of despair is just to let somebody else know that they matter by being present, by listening. So one more story. Somehow, I don't even know how I managed to get there. I got on the website of a university out, I don't remember the name of the university off the top of my head now, out in California, a small university. And they were having, this was even an article from 2013. They were commemorating the 75th anniversary of Kristallnacht. Does anybody know what that was? The Night of Broken Glass. Diane knows. I'd never heard of it before. The Night of Broken Glass happened in Germany when the Nazis, a lot of the Nazi thugs came through and broke windows and desecrated sanctuaries and started fires and took the Torah scrolls and destroyed them and shattered lives, basically, throughout the night and the next day. So the commemoration of this story included 4 people who had been children at the time. Angelina was 11, and Adele was 12, and Kurt was 13, and Leopold was almost 16 when it happened. And they were to speak at that commemoration. Though they'd been children at the time, and they'd already experienced so much bigotry and hatred for being young Jewish children. They saw their families destroyed, their parents who had been well-respected members of the community, belittled and ostracized, and their professions lost, their businesses destroyed, they lost their homes. At school, they were made fun of and harassed by their teachers and the other students, and told that they weren't worthy to be sitting in a classroom with true Germans. So much that they shouldn't have had to go through as children. And yet they still had a little bit of hope up to that point. Hope that when push came to shove, that their neighbors, that their friends who knew them would draw a line in the sand, would stand up for them. And that night, that hope was crushed. That night was violence beyond anything they'd seen before. Everywhere. The Nazi gangs were tearing through Germany. There were 250 synagogues that were set on fire. The firemen were out, standing next to their fire trucks with instructions not to do anything unless it started to threaten non-Jewish property. Policemen were walking down the streets, gently walking over the broken glass and letting the thugs do what they did. Break into the stores, loot the stores. And it got worse the next day. The next day, 30,000 men and teenagers were rounded up, torn from their families, and shipped off to Dachau and other concentration camps. There was so much more other than glass that was broken that night. Lives that were shattered and destroyed, and hope. Hope that those people that knew them best would stand up and say, this is wrong. And so as those 4 came to that commemoration as older adults, the hope in this day and age was that the people listening to their stories would learn and remember that in our time, we would learn to be hope. That we would learn to stand up against violence and brutality and prejudice and bigotry. And what really struck me about the end of this article was that the author of the article said, we cannot take hope in humanity for granted. We cannot take hope in humanity for granted. He said it is up to all of us. We are all responsible for being hope in the world. We are responsible for being hope in the world. I'd never honestly thought about it that way. But we're responsible for hope, and we're responsible for light, and we're responsible for joy, that deep, abiding joy. So that where there is despair, we will sow hope, and where there is darkness, we will sow light. And where there is sadness, we will sow joy.